Hello and welcome to The Debrief. I'm your co-host. My name is Seth Ressler.
And I'm Becky Scarcello.
And this is the show where we meet the creatives who are shaping Detroit. Becky, I don't need to tell you, history matters.
It does.
You want to understand the present. You want to know where we're going. You got to look at where we've been. And there is a lot of controversy right now, a lot of debate going on in this country about what we should teach as part of history. We don't need to rehash all that here, but this is a podcast that is about the Detroit arts and entertainment scene. And today we're going to talk about the history of some aspects of the arts and entertainment scene. Now, in history, Black women often overlooked. Often their stories don't get told.
Yes.
So today we're actually going to focus on two Black women whose story maybe isn't out there quite as much as it should be. I'm talking about Josephine Love, who is a pianist, and she's the founder of the Your Heritage House Fine Arts Center for Young People. And Dell Pryor, proprietor of the Dell Pryor Galleries. Now, I know that you give a lot of tours around the city, so you know them. I honestly have no idea. I don't know
the first thing, huh?
The first thing about them, right?
Amazing women.
Yes. So we're going to talk about how these two Black women blazed a trail for other artists here in Detroit. We have joining us a woman who is an independent curator. She has worked for over a decade in and with arts institutions. She won a 2019 Night Arts Challenge grant. Now, the way that works is she raised some money for a project, but she's got to get matching funds for that project. Right. We'll talk to her about that. She is trying to get an exhibit at the Charles Wright Museum to basically tell the story of these two women. Want to welcome to the show Malika N. Pryor. Hi, Malika.
Hi, how are you all? Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. Thanks for being here. So let's set the stage just to give us the tone. Why is telling the stories of Josephine and Dell important?
It feels like such a straightforward question, and yet comes with so many layers. But I'm going to work really, really hard to be super, super succinct. Essentially, Dell Pryor, who is still with us at the tender age of 93, Josephine Harold Love, who has since passed on, are and were respectively two incredible Black women arts institutional founders. They were both creatives by trade. As you mentioned, Josephine, a classically trained pianist. Dell Pryor, who actually worked as an interior designer before going into the brick and mortar. But ultimately, they made their way as institution builders. Josephine in the nonprofit realm, working primarily, although not only with young people. And Dell Pryor in this really community-based but also world-class gallery. So here you have this dealer that's also a mentor, and not necessarily, and those two things don't necessarily live together all the time. But because they had these rich experiences, I think both as creatives, but also as people who were very much tied to community, who cared very much about and this is going to sound so cliche, but it's also so true, so feels apropos, and that is making the world a better place and creating space for people who often didn't have space otherwise, that they ended up just making this incredible impact that resonated in the city, but then reverberated beyond.
Okay, that's pretty important.
Yeah.
Pretty heavy stuff.
I'm in.
Yeah. So let's delve a little bit deeper into Josephine Love's story. Can you tell us more about her role and what she started in the city?
Sure. So along with another arts educator, Gwen Hogue, she founded Your Heritage House. And it began on Warren. So it was actually always placed in position in what we now know as Midtown. So if we kind of think about the relationship of historic arts institutions, particularly to African-American communities and other communities of color, there's often been this line where young people, when it comes to having access to the fine and performing arts, and you think about the very best that a local or regional, or in some instances, national arts community can offer, there has been a barrier there. And Josephine, having come from a family of folks who, well, her father was the founding director of Morehouse and Spelman's Glee Clubs. He was the chair of Morehouse College's School of Music. So she'd come from this incredibly rich legacy, both from her father and her mother. And so she saw herself as a bridge, as a Black American woman who was fortunate and privileged enough to have this incredible wealth of experience. And so she wanted to make sure that all children, but particularly children who had historically been denied, would have this access. And so she worked to make it affordable. She worked to make it accessible. But beyond that, she also insisted that the very best of Detroit and regional artists were teaching the young people. So as she continued to grow, when she mentored young arts education and arts founders, like the founding artistic director of Mosaic Youth Theater, and who hasn't heard of Mosaic, especially if you're in the city of Detroit, right? She was very insistent that those that she influenced and impacted understood how important it was and how valuable children were, that they should have the very best. And so wherever you see folks that she took sort of under her wing or that she poured into, you see this continuation of just an impeccable quality for young people. This idea that wherever young people are, the best that can be made available should be made available to them. So an artist in residence might be Shirley Woodson, who just so happens to be a Kresge Eminent Artist for 2020, right? And so I remember as a student walking into what would probably have been the salon in this lovely Victorian home on East Ferry, and her saying to me, say hello to Miss Catlett. Oh, by the way, who happens to be, the great sculptor Elizabeth Catlett. I didn't have any context for who she was, but Mrs. Love did, and she ensured that the young people that were being influenced and impacted by her would also have this access. In this really intimate way, which was just incredible. And thousands of children over 35 years moved through that incredible space and refer to it. I've heard on many occasions interviewing YHH alums, and they refer to it as magical. It was a place where kids were taken seriously, and yet they were constantly having fun. And that's just such an amazing balance when you're learning and discovering.
That is really, really powerful, opening up those opportunities. So you talk a lot about the advantages she had, and I think that's incredible that she said, I need to use this to create something bigger than myself. But what were the obstacles she was up against, I'm sure? This was in the late 1960s that she was setting up the home, and what were some of those challenges she faced?
Absolutely. So you think about meeting at the nexus of being a Black person who is also a woman, who is also middle-aged. And historically, we might not think about it as much now, but it wasn't, I very much remember in my lifetime, and not that I'm so young, but I'm not too far up in age either, right? But I very distinctly remember this idea of women professionals kind of being put out to pasture, or the idea that historically, if you were an actress over 40, you couldn't play a lead, a romantic lead, because you weren't beautiful or attractive or interesting. And that sort of ideal very much played out in the professional world more broadly. And here it is, this woman who is in her 50s, whose children are essentially adults at this point, who has decided shortly after becoming a widow, losing her husband of many, many years, of over 40 years, that she was going to strike out, right? I'm sorry, for almost 30 years. She was there for almost 30 years. But that she's going to strike out and open a business. And that it's going to be a nonprofit, and it's also going to be a gallery where there are almost no galleries that specifically focuses on Black arts. Oh, and also has this, in tandem is going to be teaching young people. So, she worked really hard to build relationships, because you aren't necessarily being taken seriously right away, right? And yet she carried that with an incredible amount of grace. And people learned to put some respect on Josephine Love's name. But it wasn't without its challenges.
And we should note that you're related to both of these women, these fine women. So you're in a unique position to tell us about it. So let's move on to Dell Pryor, who is your grandmother.
Yes, she is. Same surname and all. I kept that Pryor name, and she's one of the reasons why. my grandmother, who recently was honored with a beam signing at the Scarab Club, which is a huge deal for anyone in the arts world. If I'm not mistaken, she is the first Black femme gallerist to ever sign. So that's also pretty
explain what that means. What is the significance of a
for
beam
people who don't know? Yeah.
signing?
Sure. So the Scarab Club is well over 100 years old. It is sort of like an artist social club in the city of Detroit, where lots of artists have moved through, have worked, have had studios. But the beam signing is reserved for artists, for creatives of and from the city of Detroit, but also who are from all over the world who are doing significant work at some point in Detroit. So my grandmother's beam neighbors are Detroit great Gilda Snowden, as well as Charles McGee, who, if you're anywhere ever in Midtown or downtown Detroit, you see his work very prominently displayed. But she also happens to be neighbors with Norman Rockwell. So there's that.
Wow.
That's a big deal.
Yeah.
Wow.
Diego Rivera is on a beam, just a couple beams away. So you just have these incredible folks, arts luminaries that of international import, as well as national and Detroit and regional.
Yeah. So tell us more about Dell's. She's 93 now. I remember seeing how impressive it was. I don't know, maybe 2 years ago, she was DJing a dance party somewhere. And I'm like, go Dell. She's amazing. Yeah. So tell everyone a little bit more about her opening galleries in the city.
Absolutely. So my grandmother started in 1975. So she's just a little more than 5 years sort of coming into the arts and antique world initially, and then eventually transitioning completely into contemporary art. But she starts off as a dealer really in the early 70s and continues to shift and evolve, particularly in Harmony Park, where she has the first full-on gallery. And what you see is her doing two things. Opening doors for young, incredibly talented femme and artists of color who could not show in more established galleries in the city, and then also bringing world-renowned, particularly Black artists that hadn't necessarily shown ever in the city of Detroit into the city. So creating this conversation of emerging, established, and renowned artists in a space that was always incredibly welcoming. She just had this fantastic way of making anyone, young people, teenagers who were walking through Harmony Park off the street, a young college student who was traversing through Midtown, feel like they needed to be in that space. And as a result, she was able to hone and shape dozens of collectors who would not have been collectors otherwise, which we are discovering more and more. And people don't always think about it, but it's like developing an archive, right? And so if folks aren't collecting Black art, for instance, that tells these stories and tell these histories, you think about what you often see in museums. It's artwork because somebody collected it, they preserved it, they conserved it, often in their homes or private collections, and then eventually donated it over to a cultural institution. So if other communities either don't understand the import of doing that or don't have spaces via which to access that work, then it often gets lost to time. So there's this way in which she's also contributing to this larger Black American and Black diasporic archive of art and culture. And she's done that. She did that as a brick and mortar for the better part of 50 years and continues to curate. Even now, I think she's working on 2 shows and curated a fantastic show for Detroit Artist Market last summer.
Wow.
I think that's a pretty good argument for the kind of impact.
Right. I mean, even the pandemic didn't slow her down. She's still going. So.
No.
Wow.
No, my grandmother's cooler than I am.
She's cooler than a lot of people, I think. Well, we have one last question for you.
Yes, we have one last question. There's a question that we ask everybody who comes on the show. Here we go. All right, Malika N. Pryor, curator who is putting together this exhibit for the Charles Wright Museum. Name a Detroit creative that everybody should know.
Probably almost everybody knows about him, but I would certainly say Joel Fluent Green. He is an artist and MC. He is also a creator of space. He is a space creator. He hosts the Half Stack poetry event at the music halls. I think it's the Aretha Jazz Cafe. he just is recently released a book titled The Detroit Poems, has worked with, so my day job is serving as the Senior Director of Education Programs and Outreach for the Detroit Historical Society. At the top of the pandemic, he partnered with us to create a fantastic IGTV series, Pockets of Joy, where he curated a list of folks who no longer necessarily practice poetry, but used to do it in the city. We had Dominique Morisseau, who's a Detroit native and MacArthur genius, Jessica Care Moore, internationally renowned poet, and he just curated this list of people that brought a sense of healing and salve to Detroit when we were a hotspot for COVID and when we needed to be able to think happy thoughts and be reminded of happier times and be able to use art and spoken word as a means of helping folks to get through. And that was just a fantastic partnership. And so I think anytime you have Detroit artists that are doing incredible things and could probably just go about anywhere and make the decision to plant root and build opportunities for others in the city in a contemporary context. So Dell and Josephine did this, although Dell is still creating, they were doing this 40, 50 years ago. This is something that Fluent is doing, that Joel's doing right now. And I think that's worthy of being uplifted. So that's why I chose Joel Fluent Green.
All right. Very cool. Well, Malika, thank you so much for joining us on the show. It was great to have you here.
Thank you so much for having me.
So here's the way it works. I mentioned this at the top of the show. You have won a grant, but you've got to get the matching funds. So how much do you still have left to raise?
So we were really fortunate. To whom much is given, which was awarded a $50,000 challenge grant from the Night Arts Challenge Detroit in late 2019. We all know what happened in early 2020, right? Mm-hmm. And so we've got $20,000, just over $20,000 left to raise, and are engaging a crowdfunded individual campaign. And I continue to work steadily towards accessing foundation and corporate support. But we are an independent project, fiscally sponsored. So everything you donate is tax deductible. We're really lucky that the Charles H. Wright is not only our home for the exhibition and many of the complementary programs that will go along with it, but they're also our fiscal sponsors. So they're a partner in a number of ways. And I'm really, really grateful to the Charles H. Wright, incredibly grateful to the Knight Foundation. Without that support, I couldn't even be having this conversation. I wouldn't have a grant to match. Really, really, I'm grateful to Midtown Detroit Inc., which has been a fantastic community partner from the very beginning. I consider myself, in spite of the pandemic, super, super lucky. And then to have folks like you all that are offering me a space to talk about this is just incredible. So we're working hard, but that's what we've got left.
Cool. So if you want this story to be told, and it's an important story, both of these stories, you go to whommuchisgiven.org. Malika, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much.
That's it for us here at The Debrief. Of course, lots of ways that you can find this show. We are on Apple Podcasts. We are on Spotify. You can find some of these episodes up on YouTube as well. Mm-hmm. And I'm Seth Ressler.
I'm Becky Scarcella.
And until next time, Detroit's moving.
Keep up.